Hello, welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British Rail critics, and of course my underwater train finders. You are the reason why this content remains Big Chungus. And today we're going to be talking about just that, but instead of specific locomotives, we're going to be discussing railway networks in general by country. And it's an interesting topic, though admittedly not everything on the list is entirely surprising, as naturally the larger a country is, the larger the rail network tends to be, but there are a couple surprises on this list, so I thought, why not? These are the 5 largest rail networks in the world. The Canadian rail network, at 48,000 kilometers. This may not be entirely shocking, it's just Canada kind of minds themselves generally and doesn't show up to things very often. But Canada's really big, so it makes total logical, rational sense that they would have a pretty big rail network, mostly divided between their 2 primary freight rail networks, Canadian National and Canadian Pacific. There's also Via Rail, which operates 12,500 kilometers of intercity passenger rail service. Canada is pretty rugged as a country, even to this day, especially as you go further north. Railways have always been very beneficial in that kind of environment to get necessary goods and people from place to place. The rail network helped build North America in general, and Canada was of course a major part of that. Their rail lines are a major hub for them to this day. So them breaking the top 5 in terms of being one of the largest is definitely unsurprising. India, at 65,000 kilometers. Okay, that's one you may not have expected quite as readily. India isn't exactly a small country, but there's certainly larger ones. And yet, Indian Railways owns and operates the 4th largest railway network in the world. They're nationalized, so it's owned and administered by the Indian government. But part of the reason it's so big is that trains are the major way for people to get around in India. In 2013 alone, their network carried an estimated 8 billion people and 1.01 million tons of freight. India has a lot of people in it, and all those people need to get from place to place. The rail lines are just the best way to do that in general. They run about 19,000 trains every day, and most of those are actually passenger trains at 12,000. The other 7,000 are all freight. Russia, at 87,500 kilometers. Yeah, that's not entirely shocking. Russia is, well, huge, massive. It's an enormous country. They are also nationalized under Russian Railways, or RZD, which handle that gargantuan network. In 2013 alone, the network handled 1.08 billion people and 1.2 billion tons of freight. They actually also have the 3rd highest freight volume in the world in general. The Russian people use their trains quite a lot, both with intercity service as well as long-distance traveling. Plus, the Trans-Siberian Railway, or the Moscow-Vladivostok line, is actually the world's longest single line and busiest railway line. It alone spans 9,289 kilometers. China, at 124,000 kilometers. Another superpower in the number 2 spot definitely makes some sense. China is certainly a large country on its own, and it's all handled by China Railway Corporation, which is, again, state-owned, since they're filthy communists, but they do split that responsibility up into smaller companies, just to try to keep things generally organized, but they all answer to the Chinese government. China, in particular, has made it a point to build up their rail network over the years, and they're probably only gonna get longer. In China, the rail system is actually their primary form of transportation, and they've invested in high-speed lines, 10,000 kilometers of it to be precise. Something that a lot of other countries have looked into and done, and some really should do that at some point. I'm just saying. Although, admittedly, speaking of us, the United States at 250,000 kilometers. That's right, it's us, back again. USA, USA, we're number one! We're number one at this, especially. And yeah, we do have the largest rail network in the world, though most of it isn't state-owned, as you might know. Most of the rails are operated between different private freight companies. The only thing that's handled by the state these days, for the most part, is Amtrak, because Americans took it upon themselves to start driving cars and taking planes instead. Whereas other countries still rely heavily on the rail network for transportation, Americans don't do that quite as much anymore. Though lately, with the increase in terms of ticket prices regarding air travel, trains have gotten more popular as a consideration, and it's something people are generally looking into. So over the next couple decades, America might see a pretty big cultural shift. Either way though, the freight network in America on its own makes up 80% of our entire rail network. And yeah, whenever you think about that, you probably think of the very large companies like Union Pacific, BNSF, CSX, Norfolk Southern. But the truth is that the U.S. freight rail network comprises over 500 private railroads. Smaller ones are all over the place, dotting the landscape, and some of them are rather tiny, but they generate profit. Because the fact is, moving large bulk goods long distance safely is much easier to do and better when it comes to using trains. It's just a fact. So of course, that's still something that other companies tend to do. And the private rail industry has definitely seen significant growth over the years. Amtrak, of course, sits in the corner with their passenger service. To be fair, Amtrak does a pretty decent job with what they're trying to do. They connect 500 destinations throughout 46 American states, and use more than 30 lines on their own, though I think there's a lot of room to grow when it comes to Amtrak in general. I'm hoping that at some point, we might see the building of new lines for them to utilize. Even if they stay government-owned, I think we need more trains in this country, particularly high-speed ones, which, frankly, just haven't seen much growth. Yeah, I know, there's a few, such as the Bright Line down in Florida, but definitely not as many as there should be. It's just something that Americans in general should probably consider at some point, I feel. Of course, lately, our network has been under significant scrutiny. It has been frustrating me because I can't really talk about it very much because we just don't have all the facts, and I don't get into throwing shade wherever it's unwarranted or I just don't know everything, because I like to do facts here and be as accurate as possible. Though I will go on a limb and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? I just made a video last month about how great you guys are, and you immediately ruined it. I'm just gonna ask you once, clean up your mess, okay? This is getting ridiculous. You are embarrassing everyone else that's not doing this nonsense. I'm just saying. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders. Thomas Ward, Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Royal Hudson 2860, Lord Hoth 444, Benjamin Owens, Spencer Kitson 191-232, Mr. Black Rose, Josh Johnson, Metal for Life Guy, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, DM Tribal Typhoon, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Alaric Jaspers, Brian, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, Major Klutz, Hayden DeGrow, Master of None, Dr. Racer 78, Crystal Morgan, Ohio Trucker 1, and Amtrak 2023 Productions. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.